the man who truly breathed a soul into the grand. Legendary script of Blazing Saddles in 1974 was the very person the studio struck from the lead role at the 11th hour. They hungered for his razor-sharp intellect, yet they recoiled in fear from the raw, unvarnished truth he brought with him. Behind the boisterous, uproarious laughter of this Western parody was a silent, psychological chess match played in the deep shadows. It was a place where the great black artists of that era had to transform every line of dialogue and every fleeting glance into a defensive stroke, protecting their own pride against the relentless, invisible barriers of the age. The 17th truth on this list will peel back the layers of how a seemingly harmless, trivial prop on the film set became the most elegant counterstrike, ultimately shattering the rigid, suffocating prejudices of the cinema capital that year. 1. Richard Pryor erased at the final hour. The true soul of Blazing Saddles did not reside in the director's chair, but in the sharpened pen of Richard Pryor. Those present on the set that year recount that Pryor wasn't merely writing a script, he was pouring the entire depth of pain and the acute sensitivity of a black man into every single page. He, more than anyone, understood the utter absurdity of prejudice. Yet, when the final casting list was placed upon the studio executives' mahogany desks, Richard Pryor's name was crossed out without a shred of mercy. The justification provided was hauntingly vague. They claimed his lifestyle was too complex. They feared his personal shadows would cast a dark cloud over the box office. An anonymous witness who walked the executive halls at the time whispered the truth. They wanted his brain, they wanted his humor, but they did not want his face to be the representative face of the project. It was a cold, direct strike to the dignity of a genius. Faced with such a ruthless betrayal, Pryor took an action that reduced everyone to silence. Instead of erupting in rage or filing lawsuits, he chose to step back into the darkness. He agreed to continue writing, to keep my sack sharpening the blades of dialogue to protect his creative child. Some say Pryor smiled and remarked that he wanted the world to hear his laughter, even if they never saw his face. Every satirical twist in the film was the proud laughter of that artist, echoing from the shadows. Pryor won a game of honor. He surrendered the spotlight to preserve the core, unshakable value of the truth. When the film debuted, the audience applauded what they saw on screen, but few knew that behind the curtains, the man who truly breathed life into it was quietly observing his success from afar. His absence remains the most piercing reminder of an era where talent often had to stand behind invisible, iron barriers. 2. How Cleavon Little quenched every doubt. When Richard Pryor was barred from the project, a vast hollow void was left in his wake. The filmmakers began a frantic, almost desperate hunt. They needed someone with enough gravity to carry the weight of Sheriff Bart, a black lawman standing alone in a town drowning in visceral hate. Many auditioned with loud, slapstick physical comedy, bordering on the grotesque. But then, Cleavon Little appeared. Little did not come to perform a comedy routine. He entered the audition room with the poise of a sovereign gentleman stepping out of a Shakespearean tragedy. Those who were there that day still passed down the story of the moment he sat in the chair. There was not a single wasted movement, not a single cheap gag. He carried with him the heavy stillness of a man who knew his exact worth, having spent years under the prestigious lights of Broadway. He understood that true power is not found in a scream, but in the rhythm of a breath and the piercing depth of a gaze. It is often said that Little's presence upended the studio's every calculation. They expected a submissive, easy-to-manage comedian, but they received an artist with a towering sense of self-respect. His style evoked the ghost of Sidney Poitier, elegant, intellectual, and always maintaining the upper hand. He did not react to the slurs in the script with weakness. He responded with an enlightened, knowing smile, as if he were looking straight through the sheer ridiculousness of the men standing before him. It was this regal aura that finally extinguished the doubts of the financiers. They realized that only little could transform a despised character into an icon of absolute superiority. He wasn't just playing a sheriff, he was teaching Hollywood a masterclass in class and dignity. Little transformed every frame into a stage of confidence, forcing the audience to respect his character from the very first glance. 3. The emergency weekend call. The production of Blazing Saddles was akin to a ship hurtling through the eye of a storm. No sooner had the lead role stabilized than another disaster struck the character of the Waco Kid. The original actor was physically incapable of fulfilling his duties due to a severe health crisis. The set descended into chaos. In the midst of the panic, a desperate emergency weekend call was placed to Gene Wilder. People tell this story today as if it were a modern miracle. Wilder received the call while resting and without a moment's hesitation. He packed his bags. He flew through the night, crossing multiple time zones to stand on the set by exactly Monday morning. When he stepped out of the car, his sheer, unruffled calm acted as a sedative for the crew's tension. He didn't demand the script be tailored to him. He simply stepped into the soul of the story. The most mystical part was the instantaneous connection between Gene Wilder and Cleavon Little. There was no time for rehearsals, no long dinners to build chemistry. They met on the set and immediately became a singular, synchronized force. The look in Wilder's eyes toward Little was not the look of an actor performing a scene. It was a genuine, soulful empathy between two humans who knew they were creating something revolutionary together. Rumors persist that many of their legendary interactions were entirely improvised. They understood each other to a point where words became redundant. Wilder chose to restrain his own performance, allowing Little to shine in the vital moments, and vice versa. Their friendship on screen warmed the coldest parts of this Western script. It remains a testament that when two kindred artistic spirits meet, neither time nor preparation can act as a barrier. 4. The legend who sang without knowing the prank. One of the defining elements of the film's unique identity is its grand theme song. Director Mel Brooks wanted a genuine, sweeping Western epic to open his satirical work. He invited Frankie Lane, the living legend behind classic cowboy cinema scores. But there was a secret the crew kept hidden throughout the entire recording session. Frankie Lane had absolutely no idea this was a comedy. Lane walked into the studio with all the solemnity and professional pride of a veteran artist. He genuinely believed he was singing for a grand, historical masterpiece. He poured his entire heart and soul into every note, making the rafters vibrate with his heroic resonance. Studio staff recalled having to struggle to keep a stone-faced expression to avoid bursting into laughter at his sincere, over-the-top passion. It was that absolute, unwavering seriousness that created a legendary effect. When his magnificent, booming voice echoed over the absurd and ridiculous images of the film, it created a contrast so ironic, it was perfection. Lane unintentionally became the catalyst that elevated the satire to a new, intellectual height without ever realizing it. Stories tell that when Lane first viewed the film, he was stunned, but eventually, he smiled as he realized the brilliance of the joke. His contribution was not just a song, it was a symbol that art sometimes requires absolute sincerity to truly expose the absurdity of life. 5. The polite refusal of the Cowboy King, John Wayne. John Wayne, the king of the Western genre, was the man every director craved to have in their work. Mel Brooks tried his luck by sending the script to Wayne, hoping he might accept a small, symbolic cameo. Wayne read it with meticulous care. Those close to him recounted that he laughed uncontrollably while reading those sharp, gritty pages. However, Wayne issued a refusal that was as gentlemanly as it was firm. He candidly admitted that the language and situations were far too sharp, perhaps even dangerous for the pristine, standard-bearing image he had spent decades constructing. He said, "My audience would never be able to accept me in a movie like this, but I truly, truly love it." Wayne's refusal was not an act of artistic rejection, but rather an act of protection for his personal legacy. Yet, he left behind a promise. "I will be the first person to buy a ticket when this hits theaters." And he kept his word. The silent background support of a titan like John Wayne gave the production team the hidden strength they needed to push forward. This demonstrates that even the old guard, the representatives of Hollywood's conservatism, had to acknowledge the power of this new, radical wind. A refusal that carried the weight of total recognition that was the way the elders showed respect to the rebels who dared to break the rules. 6. A regal assertion of black excellence. In the midst of a dusty, wild western town filled with vulgarity and grit, the appearance of Count Basie and his full orchestra was a profound visual shock. Imagine in that barren, lawless land, a world-renowned jazz orchestra appears, every member dressed in a sharp, immaculate suit, playing April in Paris with absolute, unflappable serenity. Many viewers at the time dismissed this as a random gag. In reality, it was a proud, defiant artistic manifesto. Those working on the scene recall that Count Basie didn't just come to film a scene, he came to bring a standard of excellence. Placing jazz legends in a Western setting was the way Mel Brooks and Richard Pryor declared, "The black artist does not only belong to stories of suffering, they are the very symbols of elegance and the pinnacle of culture." It is often whispered that the moment Count Basie smiled and nodded to Cleveland Little on set was a silent embrace of gratitude between two generations. It was the total opposite of the crude, chaotic nature of the villains surrounding them. This scene serves as a reminder that regardless of adversity or hate, the grace and nobility of the artist will always exist as a natural law. 7. The most expensive rebuttal to prejudice. This is the specific truth I alluded to at the beginning of this video, a tiny detail that carries an immense psychological weight in one particular scene. Sheriff Bart arrives on horseback carrying a luxury Gucci-branded saddlebag in a mud-caked 19th century setting. This high-fashion item looks completely out of place. But this was no mere costume department error. Rumor has it that Cleveland Little himself was the one who suggested this detail. He wanted his character to be more than just a competent sheriff. He had to be a man of superior aesthetic taste. Someone who did not belong to the intellectually bankrupt world of that town. That Gucci bag was an elegant, high-class rebuttal sent to the entire system of prejudice. It said, "I am not here to dissolve into your inferiority. I am here to dominate this landscape with my own excellence." Film historians later noted that the saddlebag was a symbol of opulence placed in the heart of a wasteland. Little used a material object to assert a spiritual status. He didn't need a gun to intimidate, he used style and intellect to make his opponents feel inherently inferior. That is the ultimate art of resistance achieving victory without ever uttering a single bitter word. 8. A moment of fragility behind the cruelty. Art sometimes demands that an artist confront the darkest, most hollow parts of their own soul. Actor Burton Gilliam, tasked with playing a hateful bigot in the film, suffered a genuine crisis behind the scenes. The script required him to hurl the most vicious, soul-crushing racial slurs directly at Cleveland Little. During the rehearsal, Gilliam simply collapsed emotionally. He could not bring himself to speak those words. He feared they would deeply wound the co-star he held in such high regard. A witness recalled Gilliam standing paralyzed on the set, his eyes wet with shame. It was in that moment that Cleveland Little walked over, placed a steady hand on his shoulder, and gave him a compassionate, understanding hug. Little told Gilliam, "Don't worry, this isn't you speaking, it's your character exposing the raw ugliness of the world. Just do it, so that everyone can see how utterly ridiculous it truly is." Little's grace and professional composure removed a 1,000-pound weight from his colleague's heart. Because of that moment, the film's most jagged scene was completed with grace, turning hate into a lesson of awakening rather than just meaningless insults. 9. The heartbreaking secret of the first Waco Kid. Before Gene Wilder created the legendary Waco Kid we know today, the role belonged to Gig Young, a celebrated Oscar winner. But the first day of recording became a tragic, somber memory for the entire crew. Gig Young arrived in a state of total physical and mental exhaustion. He was losing a desperate battle with alcohol addiction, a silent, internal storm that had been ravaging him for years. The moment the cameras rolled for the very first scene, his body simply refused to obey his will. He suffered a seizure and collapsed right there on the set floor. Those present recall an atmosphere that was deathly silent. It wasn't the silence of anger over a delayed schedule, but the silence of mourning for a great talent in the process of self-destruction. The studio was forced to make the agonizing decision to terminate his contract immediately to protect both his health and the project. Gig Young's quiet departure after that day remains a sorrowful low note behind the film's bright, shining lights. It serves as a reminder that even those who have touched the summit of fame carry pains that no role can ever truly hide. 10. Madeline Kahn's quest for the Oscar. Madeline Kahn took on the role of Lily von Stupp with a daunting mission. She had to be simultaneously seductive, hilarious, and deeply satirical. She decided to parody the legendary Marlene Dietrich, but instead of a simple imitation, Kahn transformed it into a deeply personal performance centered on profound weariness and world weariness. Backstage sources say Kahn practiced until her vocal cords were nearly damaged just to achieve that signature gravelly rasp. She spent countless hours studying the art of moving slowly, as if every step she took was a physical burden of her own fame. This total devotion was not wasted. Madeline Kahn's Lily von Stupp became one of the most immortal supporting characters in cinema history. That self-sacrificing effort earned her an Academy Award nomination, an incredibly rare achievement for a role in a satirical comedy. She proved that when you approach your work with absolute gravity, even a joke can be transformed into a masterpiece recognized by the entire world. 11. The test screening that almost killed the movie. Once the film was finalized, a private test screening was arranged for the studio's top-tier executives. The result was an unmitigated disaster. Instead of the sound of laughter, the screening room was filled with a suffocating, deathly silence. The executives sat motionless, their faces cold and unreadable. One of them stood up in a visible rage and stormed out before the film was even half over. They deemed the film an insult too sensitive, too radical, and a guaranteed lightning rod for boycotts. They demanded that Mel Brooks cut at least 20 minutes of the most crucial footage, including the sharpest satirical bites. Mel Brooks faced a crushing choice: compromise the film's soul to get it into theaters, or keep its identity intact and watch it be buried forever. In a final act of desperation, Brooks arranged another screening, this time for regular studio staff and blue-collar workers. The result was the complete opposite. People were doubled over in laughter. The applause was thunderous and unending. It was the genuine laughter of the common people that saved the film's life. It proved that those in power are often the furthest from reality, and only the public truly has the right to decide the fate of art. 12. The prank that offended a screen goddess. The film features a central villain named Hedy Lamarr. This was a deliberate, mischievous play on words to tease the legendary Hedy Lamarr, once famously called the most beautiful woman in the world. Hedy Lamarr did not find it humorous at all. She felt that using her name in a satirical comedy was a direct assault on her personal honor. She filed a lawsuit against the studio, demanding a massive financial settlement. Lawyers braced for a long, grueling legal war. However, Mel Brooks viewed the entire situation with a light heart. He even felt a sense of honor that a legend of her stature had noticed them at all. Eventually, the matter was settled with a formal apology and a payment, but the joke remained in the film. This inadvertently made Hedy Lamarr's name immortal to a much younger generation, Proving the film's pervasive power, it was strong enough to make even the most distant icons speak up. 13. Richard Pryor's war for the ugly truth. During the script editing phase, censors used heavy red pens to strike out an endless list of sensitive words. They wanted to sanitize the story, to turn it into a safe, family-friendly movie, but Richard Pryor stood his ground in a fierce, uncompromising protest. He argued that if you want to condemn racism, you must force the audience to see exactly what it looks like and hear what it sounds like in reality. Pryor believed that using softer language would merely be an act of covering up a brutal and bloody truth. He wanted the audience to feel uncomfortable, to feel a sense of shock, because only in that state of discomfort would they truly begin to think. Many still recall his heated debates with the big bosses, where he famously said, "Don't try to clean up our pain just so you can feel more comfortable while watching it." Thanks to Pryor's iron-willed consistency, the roughest, grittiest words remained. This transformed Blazing Saddles into a direct mirror reflecting the true ugliness of prejudice. Pryor used the very linguistic weapons of the enemy to strike back at them, turning the pages of the script into a fortress protecting the undeniable truth. 14. The last-minute title. A masterstroke of deception. The title of a film is the first point of contact with the public, and the production team struggled immensely with this. Originally, the script was titled Tex X, a sharp, clever play on Malcolm X. Later, it was slated to be Black Bart to highlight the protagonist. But Mel Brooks realized a profound truth: if the title was too obvious, the audience would have their guard up from the very beginning. They settled on Blazing Saddles, a name that sounded Western, epic, and almost boringly serious. This was a masterclass in psychological strategy. They wanted the audience to walk into the theater expecting a traditional, heroic cowboy film, only to have the satirical message explode like a bomb the moment the curtain rose. This 11th hour name change allowed the film to reach a massive audience, including those who typically avoided social satires. By the time they realized they were watching a profound critique of society, it was far too late to leave. They were already caught in the story, conquered by the laughter, and forced to confront sensitive issues in the most natural way possible. 15. Turning hate into a ridiculous farce. One of the most monumental successes of the black artists in this film was the way they dismantled the villains. Instead of portraying bigots as terrifying, powerful monsters, they transformed them into pathetic, bumbling fools. Every time a villain uttered a hateful line, the script immediately plunged him into a ridiculous situation that made him more pitiable than fearsome. Sources say Richard Pryor spent an enormous amount of time crafting these dialogues. He wanted to strip away the intimidating power of hate. When you can laugh directly in the face of your enemy, you have already won half the war. The artists on the crew used their own intellect as their primary weapon. This approach was deeply awakening. It taught the audience that hate is almost always rooted in a profound lack of understanding and sheer stupidity. By exposing the absurdity of those clinging to old, rotting mindsets, the film gave power back to the oppressed, turning laughter into a sophisticated and highly effective tool of resistance. 16. The secret of the man who played 3 roles. Beyond being the man steering the project from behind the lens, director Mel Brooks quietly left his personal mark by taking on 3 entirely different roles. The audience sees him as the dim-witted governor, a tribal chief with a bizarre aura, and an anonymous aviator in the final sequence. Taking on these multiple masks was not just about showing off his range or saving the budget. Those on the set often whispered that this was the artist's way of directly immersing himself in the rhythm of the absurdity he was creating. He wanted to personally taste the ridiculousness of the film, to calibrate the emotions with surgical precision. He turned the set into a grand stage where all distance between the storyteller and the character was dissolved. Rumor has it that during the most stressful days of filming, Brooks appearing suddenly in a bizarre costume broke the tension for the entire crew, reminding them that they were creating something truly free. 17. The regal aura of Cleavon Little. This is the part we have been waiting for. Cleavon Little's magnetic aura was no accident or simple acting technique. It was forged over years spent under the lights of the prestigious Broadway stage. Little brought the majesty of a true theatrical titan into the chaotic, dusty environment of the Wild West. Witnesses from that time recount that whenever the camera rolled, Little maintained a core of absolute stillness amidst the noise of his co-stars. He calibrated every gesture, every look, and every breath with extreme precision. Instead of allowing the character of Bart to be swallowed by the absurdity, he maintained a sense of intellectual and physical superiority. He didn't come to act for the audience. He came to live in the character with an unshakable sense of self-worth. It was that heavy, weighted silence that made the villains around him appear even smaller and more laughable. 18. The ending that nearly perished. As the final frames were captured, the studio launched a fierce offensive against the film's subversion of traditional cinematic structure. They feared that the sequence where characters break the fourth wall and storm out of the studio lot would strip the work of its gravity. It was a cold, high-stakes psychological war between the visionaries and the suits. One executive slammed his fist on the table, his voice echoing with disdain. The public pays to see a cowboy movie, not a mob of lunatics destroying their own set. They demanded a conventional resolution, a definitive shootout in the town of Rock Ridge, where good triumphs over evil as the screen fades to black. But to Mel Brooks, this wasn't just a scene, it was a manifesto, facing the suffocating pressure to amputate the sequence. He delivered a chillingly sharp retort. If we've dared to shatter every racial and historical mold from the start, why should we kneel before an archaic ending if a film cannot break itself? It is not truly free. He understood that to strike back at the absurdity of prejudice, the film had to become absolutely, uncompromisingly absurd. The production team fought back with patient, steely logic. A work that deconstructs every trope from the first frame required a symbolic climax of equal magnitude. They wanted the audience to realize the story didn't end at the edge of the screen. This defiance stood as a monument to absolute creative autonomy because they refused to flinch. We were granted one of the most ingenious and subversive finales in cinematic history, a moment where the veil between fiction and reality is masterfully incinerated. 19. The most surreal premiere in history. To cement the work's spirit of lawless freedom, the organizers staged a premiere that bore no resemblance to Hollywood's usual shallow glitz. Instead of emerging from sleek, polished limousines, the guests of honor were invited to ride on horseback through the teeming city streets, descending upon the Pickwick Drive-In Theater. The sight of horses moving with ghostly calm through the heart of the 1974 modern metropolis created an image steeped in both nostalgia and biting irony. It resurrected the spirit of the Old West in the middle of the 20th century, a proud, defiant salute from artists who dared to abandon the safety of the herd. Mel Brooks refused to let this be a mere publicity stunt. He wanted the audience submerged before the first frame even flickered. That night, he made a haughty declaration to the press: "If you're going to see a movie about guys on horses, you'd better be sitting on a horse when you watch it." The Pickwick Drive-In transformed into an unprecedented spectacle, over 250 guests mounted on horseback instead of sheltered in cars. The scent of leather and the heavy breath of livestock mingled with the aroma of popcorn and urban exhaust. It wasn't just a screening, it was a piece of installation art, forcing everyone present to feel the chilling truth: a new era of cinema had truly dawned. 20. The Outcast project that saved an empire. Once dismissed as a reckless gamble and met with a chorus of rejection from the elite, Blazing Saddles became ironically the studio's ultimate lifeline. During production, the film teetered on the brink of cancellation numerous times. Studio executives viewed the script by Richard Pryor and Mel Brooks as nothing more than a profane mess. Even after filming wrapped, many theaters refused to sign contracts, paralyzed by the fear of political and racial fallout. Warner Brothers was hemorrhaging money from high-budget blockbusters that had withered at the box office. They were bracing for a total financial eclipse. But when the first theater doors opened, a seismic shift occurred. On a skeletal budget of roughly $2.6 million, the film ravaged the charts, hauling in over $119 million, the equivalent of over $700 million today. It was an impossible feat for an R-rated satire. Witnesses recall that the very executives who once demanded Richard Pryor be scrubbed from the credits, or that the most sensitive Beatty scenes be burned, were now the ones clapping the loudest at the victory galas. An internal source revealed that upon seeing the weekly revenue reports, one senior manager who had once been the film's most vocal executioner could only mutter, "I don't understand why they're laughing so much, but I love the way the money is pouring into our accounts." This windfall didn't just provide liquidity, it resuscitated a crumbling Warner Brothers empire, providing the capital for the legendary projects that would follow. It remains the most brutal evidence that courage and deviance are sometimes the only assets an accounting firm cannot quantify. The men once labeled dangerous to the bottom line were the ones who kept the empire alive. 21. Escaping the set. A haunting reminder of reality. The final sequence, where the characters flee the studio and spill onto the actual streets, carries a profound, almost haunting social message. By letting the chaotic chase unfold outside the historic Grauman's Chinese Theater, the ultimate altar of Hollywood glamour, the filmmakers issued a cold warning: prejudices and barriers are not merely ghosts confined to old celluloid. When Bart and the Waco Kid stepped beyond the studio gates, they weren't just escaping a Western script, they were entering the real Hollywood, where discrimination still lurked behind the neon billboards. Film critics have long noted that the characters stopping at a theater to watch themselves on screen was a calculated psychological trap. Mel Brooks once reflected on this intent. "I wanted the audience to realize that the stage may end, but prejudices never simply vanish when the house lights come up." The image of two heroes, one white, one black, departing the world of illusions together in a luxurious limousine, was a direct assault on the reality of the era. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, it was an act of insurrection. They chose to write their own conclusion rather than submit to the scripts written by a prejudiced society. That final frame serves as a quiet, yet piercing reminder. Stepping out of the frame was the artist's way of declaring that the struggle for justice and dignity does not conclude when the credits roll. It persists in the streets we walk every day, in every gaze, and in every decision. Over 50 years have passed, yet the rhythmic thud of hooves echoing against the hum of engines in the Hollywood night still resonates, a question left hanging in the air for the future to answer. More than half a century has slipped away since those first frames of Blazing Saddles graced the silver screen. The great artists like Richard Pryor and Cleavon Little have now entered the realm of eternity. Beyond the satirical laughter, what they left behind was not just a cinematic masterpiece. They left a historical testament to resilience, a record of how a generation used intellect and elegance to smile in the face of a world that once tried to deny them. In every one of those nostalgic frames, we see the shadows of our own youth, of the fathers and mothers who stood tall through the stormy decades. We think we fully understand their courage behind the spotlight, but some believe the true story has still not been fully told, because what archivists have recently discovered while unearthing the private records of studio officials from that year still raises haunting questions today. Was there a secret draft carrying a completely different ending that was forced to vanish forever from history? What we see today may only be the visible tip of an iceberg filled with silent, heavy sacrifices. For the viewers watching this, The women who have personally witnessed the great transformation of our era. What is your most cherished memory of walking into a cinema in the 70s? Which character's legacy do you hold closest to your heart? Share your story in the comments below. These are not just words, they are an invaluable piece of our shared history. And hit the follow button so you don't miss the moment we unearth the next secret.